Well, what's been happening since we've been on holiday? 100% about turn by Trump on tariffs. We're running out of nuclear power for AI apparently, and it's the final cup final tomorrow, not the World Cup final tomorrow. Crystal Palace versus Man United. Man City guy. I'm really fumbling this morning because we started early. It's 8 o'clock. We're not used to this. Welcome to the Internet Seriously, a humorous look at tech, news and politics. I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor, also in Oxford.
And today we welcome Professor Ciaran Martin of Oxford University's Blavatnik School of Government. Ciaran is a former CEO of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre and an expert on ransomware attacks. Welcome, Ciaran.
Hi, Lucien. Hi, Emily.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Marks and Spencer's cyber attack, this nightmare, their recovery continues and online orders remain paused weeks after a data breach. Next, Uber arrives in Oxford, but with limited options. That's a passion project story for us because we all live and work around Oxford. And finally, in Switzerland, we have a duck caught by a speed camera, apparently a repeat offender. Before we kick off, please hit subscribe to this channel and hit follow on Apple Podcasts. We need you and love you, and rate and review us, particularly if you like us. Thank you. The buttons are below. Emily, I'm going to hand over to you to start this discussion with Ciaran about Marks and Spencer's. This icon, we love Marks and Spencer's. It's the place we go on the way home. And we found for the last few weeks that we've gone into this place which represents British treats and goodies. And we found that this is this sort of dystopian thing. Now, let's be clear. We're not talking about Summertown Marks and Spencer's, where there's a different level of service. They're serving a different clientele. We're talking about the Cowley Marks and Spencer's, which feels like a sort of emergency backup food bank for the last 3 weeks. Yes. Emily, what do you think? And over to you and Ciaran on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was actually impressed going into Marks and Spencer's yesterday, Ciaran, that even in Cowley the shelves feel reasonably full, but online orders still paused. I mean, for people who might not be familiar with what a ransomware attack is, could you explain what ransomware actually means? And maybe also speculate or tell us what is known about what happened in Marks and Spencer's case.
Well, you wonderfully upmarket people in Summertown are clearly having easier experience than those of us who live in the surrounding villages and have to contend with the unfortunately rather struggling M&S at the train station, and particularly in this hot weather where it's been running quite short of water and other soft drinks. But nonetheless, ransomware classically is when a bunch of criminals get into a network and lock the network owner out of it, so it doesn't work. And if you think of the basic transactions of everyday digital life, the sort of thing we're doing now remotely, this emails, invoices, HR databases, all of the things that make an organization tick can be locked out. And the criminals are looking for a transaction. And that transaction is to sell you a key, a cryptographic key, to let you back in. And they charge for it. And it's in their interest to make it work. So in this absurd world of mostly Russian, in this case probably not Russian, interestingly, but mostly Russian criminality, they have dark websites with customer reviews telling you that the key works and so on. There are a couple of sort of modifications in terms of this story. One is it doesn't look like it's Russian. Another is that it's not a complete lockout. As you say, you're going into stores and things are there, and digital payments in store seem to have been unaffected entirely for the duration. It seems like staff are getting paid and other things that could be problematic. So it's a partial lockout. It's only some of the key servers. And the other thing is, we don't quite know what the ransom demand is and what it's for, but there's a secondary point, which is sometimes called ransomware, but purists like to call it extortion rather than ransomware, because it's about data theft, and where either instead of, or in this case, as well as locking you out of the network, they take some personal data, some customer data, or sensitive corporate data. It doesn't be personal data. In all cases, it hasn't been. And they copy the data, send you some of it so that they have it, and they essentially ask you to pay for a promise that they won't release it onto the dark web. So that's a different transaction. In the first transaction, they're asking you for a key, an actual product, and the absence of that key is causing real world direct damage to the business or the organization, because it can't do what it does on a day-to-day basis. In data extortion, if nothing else happens, the organization's working fine, all the networks are working as normal, but there's this sort of threat hanging over them, and you're asked to buy a promise from criminals rather than a product. So that's kind of what we mean by ransomware.
Now, going on to the attack itself, we hear that it's a method, it's a sort of this mixture when you're dealing with getting this very sensitive information. The speculation is that they used a combination of phishing attack and social engineering to actually get access to effectively a Marks and Spencer's engineer's phone.
Yeah.
And through SIM swapping, I'm just speculating about if I was going to do this, this is the type of thing I would do, because I know that our engineers here at Oxford Information Labs and the Global Signal Exchange, we are vetted in this security area, and we have extensive training around social engineering. But it's getting tough, isn't it, for the engineers?
Yeah, so being both a long-time government bureaucrat and now an academic, I couldn't start the answer without at least qualifying and picking at the question, Lucien. So, two things about that. One is, in terms of the data that was copied, and we might come back to this later, I would argue that it isn't actually that sensitive, but
Yes.
some of the data on the way in is sensitive, so we should come back to that. But the second caveat, and this is quite important, is that everything I'm about to say is essentially speculative, because M&S haven't made an official statement about how it happened, and nor have the government or indeed anybody else. Now, there's a lot of rumor mill stuff, and a lot of it seems well sourced, and there's a lot of technical evidence available, but we have to caveat all of this by saying that the full picture may change in the course of time. But that notwithstanding, it does seem that there is a substantial direct sort of human technical hybrid aspect to this. The best indication of that is what my old organization, the National Cybersecurity Centre, did, because of course there are similar goings on at the Co-op and rumours about what's going on at Harrods. And so the NCSC put out this very good piece of guidance about how to make sure IT help desks didn't reset passwords for key systems administrators. And that advice came out on Easter Monday, a public holiday. And in my time at the NCSC, we didn't sort of randomly put out quite specific guidance about specific aspects of cyber attacks on public holidays. So you can make an inference that this had something to do with it. Added to that, a lot of the reporting suggests that somehow, whether it was SIM swapping, whatever, that bit's quite murky, they seem to establish a credible way of pretending to be a privileged access user, somebody who had control over large parts of the network.
And Emily, once you're a privileged access user, once you've got access to somebody's device, you have access really effectively to their personal accounts that they manage, but also, more importantly, the organizations that they're working for.
Yes, and the phone is like this sort of ectopic brain. It's like the control center for your whole life, isn't it? And so if you can get hold of somebody who has that privileged access device, and you then have a way into anything that they have the ability to access. Ciaran, I wanted to pick up on, well, there's so much to talk about here,
yes.
But you were talking about how crazy it is that, the different exploits or the different gangs have review sites on the dark web. And also there was an incident, I think yesterday, Joe Tidy of the BBC was reporting that he was contacted by one of the alleged criminals who was bragging about what they had done or not done to the co-op, and showing this journalist, a BBC journalist, apparently evidence of their criminality. I mean, in what world do criminals actually proactively contact journalists to claim responsibility for a crime and show evidence of criminality? Doesn't that speak to the culture of impunity and the fact that really no criminals in cybercrime get prosecuted or ever go to jail? Is this a satisfactory position?
Well, there's all sorts of things to unpack there, and just briefly going back to how they got in and the social engineering aspect of this. I think one of the things that is unusual about this is that clearly there may well have been not just very good phishing emails, maybe AI generated and so forth, but actual conversations between human beings and criminals and an IT help desk to persuade them to do this. And as you were saying, Emily, with the privileged access user, and we tell organizations this all the time when we're doing cyber training, the chief executive is not the most useful person. It's the person who holds the key.
I can definitely endorse that.
I think to do anything at all, Ciaran.
To do anything, actually.
As a former public sector CEO, I heartily endorse that. I would do everything to work for me. But anyway, so on this impunity point and the whole sort of ludicrous situation we find ourselves in with these things are marketing. I think that unlike other parts of crime, the ransomware people actually sort of need a brand because this is all about fear. And if you can stoke up fear through the attack, but then sell the reassurance with all these validations of previous payers who got out of digital jail, then that can incentivize boards and corporate leaders and others to pay. So it's in their interest to have these brands and so forth. It's also, frankly, the case, I think we know enough about the ransomware crews over the years to surmise that quite a few of them have quite big egos and quite enjoy the attention and so forth. I mean, they tend to be young men who would be susceptible to that sort of thing. But there's a big geographic problem in this. Now, this might not be the case in the Marks and Spencers and Co-op hacks because they appear to be native speakers of English. There are rumors that they're affiliated to this weird and quite disparate group, sometimes known as Scattered Spider, who carried out the hacks of two big casinos in Las Vegas in 2023. And one of those leaders is awaiting trial. One of the alleged leaders is awaiting trial in California, having perhaps been a bit too obviously living the high life in Spain and attracting the attention of the authorities. So there's a chance, more than an outside chance, that in this case you would have that rarity, which is the imprisonment of a serious cyber criminal. But we are talking from Oxford. So the Department of Sociology here at the University of Oxford published the first sort of study of the geography of cybercrime last year. And it will surprise nobody that in terms of its heat map, out on its own with a dark shade all by itself, was Russia, home of an estimated 75% of ransomware. And the thing is, never mind current relations with Russia, where obviously we're not going to do any law enforcement cooperation. The Russian constitution, I checked this yesterday because it's just such a strong thing. I wanted to make sure it's right, and it is. The Russian constitution prohibits the extradition of its own citizens.
Right.
So unless a Russian leaves Russian territory, they will never face justice in any other country. And what's unique about cybercrime, it's very common in policing to talk about, well, cybercrime is just another form of crime. No, it's not. Because, and this is crucial, you don't have to set foot in British territory in order to harm Britain. And in, say, global terrorism, you could do all the plotting abroad, all of it. But somebody somewhere had to either be in Britain or arrive in Britain to do something, and that would provide some interdiction or at least apprehension after the event opportunity. None of that happens here. So I think both in terms of the scale and the jurisdictional problem, it actually sort of breaks our model of policing, because if you're a well brought up British citizen, you think, well, I have two expectations of the police if I'm the victim of a crime. One is I'll be taken seriously and sympathetically as a victim, and the second is the police will pursue the perpetrators with a decent chance of bringing them to justice. Neither of those hold here because of the scale of cybercrime, the numbers, there's millions and billions depending on how you categorize events. There's no conceivable way you could scale up policing to deal with these things.
This is too much fun.
Yeah.
I really, really want to dig into this. And Emily and I
Yeah.
studied this
Yeah.
at MBA, where we were taught actually strategy by a former policeman who did strategy in the police. And he said in 1970, you'd be in a car chase and they'd be chasing the criminal, and they'd have to stop at the border of their jurisdiction and phone up and hand over to the next police service across the border. And they unlocked so much being able to go across borders. And we find, Emily, with the global signal exchange, we are now trying to break down those barriers and work cooperatively and internationally, but it's a huge challenge. Ciaran, I'm just going to wrap on this because we're eating up the precious time that we have with you. I just wanted to turn the focus slightly, just briefly, on Marks and Spencer's, their staff and the recovery. I don't sense that large checks are being written here and a big load of cryptocurrency is being shifted out of Marks and Spencer's to pay these. I get the sense, would you agree, disagree, that they're kind of trying to build their own new systems. They've paused online orders, which is a colossal operation for a few weeks now, which is a huge impact on their share price. And also a lot of their just-in-time suppliers have said, we've been told to just send stuff to Marks and Spencer's, even if it seems to have hit badly their orders system, but it seems that their suppliers are helping them out. I just a few words from you on how that, back to them, the victims of this crime, and their customers.
Well, first of all, Lucien, I'm very disappointed because when you said you were going to rap on this, I thought you meant in the Eminem Jay-Z sense rather than moving on. So I was great.
There's some AI coming up on that.
Don't say that with Igor and Charlie around, because the next thing we'll see is
me doing a rap
Lucien
song
as a rapper.
Excellent. Well, look, I can't say for sure whether or not M&S have paid or considered paying. There are some cases where people pay and the key doesn't work, but I think it looks more likely than not that they haven't paid. And I think there's an important point here about supporting them in that decision. It is easy and very common, particularly in the United States, for people to pay their way out of trouble, and all that means is more of it comes. So if they have taken this brave decision and it comes out in the fullness of time, I think they deserve credit because they have taken one for Team UK by showing that British companies perhaps are not as susceptible to pay as some in other countries. And if that happens at scale, then you should see a behavioral shift by the criminals. So therefore, it's good that suppliers are helping them out. It's good that people are mitigating. I think there is just a lesson from this, and it's a worrying one. Somebody who tries to be realistic about the cyber threat, but you started this conversation by talking about the iconic brand and the disruption and so forth. And it turns out it's not proved that difficult for a bunch of semi-organized criminals to take out an iconic UK brand. Now, joking aside, we can live without M&S for a few weeks, or at least partial functioning. Other alternatives are available. But this is a playbook not just for cyber criminals. It's a playbook for anybody who would want to harm the UK. Sometimes, and I hate the way this sort of sounds, but because it sounds so amoral, but sometimes sort of the big nation states suffer from the same sort of obsession with the spectacular that global terrorists have done in the past. They were always obsessed with sort of trying to do something really difficult, like take out aircraft, whereas they could cause mayhem, and sometimes did, by simpler but less, if you like, from their twisted point of view, glamorous attacks. Sometimes big nation state cyber criminals have fixated on really difficult things like power grids and TV stations, which are really hard to do. You can do a lot of damage to the UK just by messing up loads of organizations at the same time. And that's why, the whole point, and I'm sure M&S will be doing lots of learning from this, and so should other organizations, the whole point about how you recover and how you limit the damage in the first place and then recover is absolutely crucial. And I do think as a country, we should be much more worried about that than pointless panics about personal data.
Yeah,
just
Ciaran,
point to,
I wanted to pick up the parallels, that what's woven through your remarks is parallels with national security threats like terrorism and so on. I want to pick up on that. And I also want to pick up on the kind of the recovery and protection bit, the sort of the forward-looking bit. But first, I think we need to hear about your guilty pleasure online.
Ciaran Martin, what is your guilty pleasure online?
As someone with a portfolio life, I end up having loads of different online identities. And one of my pet hates is people's attempts to pretend they're measuring public opinion with online surveys. So very often, I just log in all the time with all these different accounts, particularly in low turnout surveys, and vote repeatedly for the option that the organizer clearly doesn't want.
That's really naughty. That is really
admission.
bad.
That is fantastic, but I love it.
I love it.
Yes. That's going to go
And
on
does
our
that
Christmas
give you some
special.
sort of twisted satisfaction? Yes.
I wanted to go on to talk about Uber in Oxford because it's a little passion topic of mine. But Emily, it's just too interesting what has said, because we have found that the retail sector, the travel and tourism sector, the delivery sector, in all of our security conferences and meetings that we're having, they're kind of absent. They've not been there. They're not proactively interested in this. We don't know who they are. They're starting to call us.
That's right. We're starting to see interest from them, but it's clearly a problem that is beyond the capability of one actor to do. But I'm very struck by what you were saying about, Russia's constitution preventing extradition. And what some of the mood music I'm picking up in these conferences about scams and fraud, classic crime, is people are now starting to weave in categorizations of national security threats, which clearly unlocks a whole different toolbox for states. And the way that you were talking about ransomware it's all about stoking up fear, and then that reassurance very much is resonant of the sort of terrorism threat, because actually terrorism works if the population is afraid and limits what it does. So just a couple of words from you on national security threat, and also about how do companies protect themselves and recover from these sort of devastating attacks. And then I want to move on to Uber.
So very quickly, I think on the national security point, I was serving in government when organized crime became categorized as a national security threat. And I was always a bit skeptical, sort of thing that sounded good and made people feel better and made them feel sort of prioritized. But I think in terms of cyber organized crime, it's about the impact as much as the fear. So last June, we had some of the biggest hospitals in South London operating at 10% capacity for a week, and the government issued an emergency appeal for blood donations for 2 types of blood that they were running out of for transfusions. Now, the cause of that is a cyber attack on a private sector provider to Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust. If that had occurred by some form of physical sabotage, that would be treated as an act of terrorism, or a very serious crime, probably an act of terrorism if it had some sort of political motivation. So it is a national security threat. In terms of how organizations protect themselves, and I keep banging on about this, but there is a playbook, it's about assessing what matters most. There's about then perimeter defenses and keeping people out. There's then how your ability to detect people who do get in, your ability to mitigate what they can do, and then your ability to recover. And I think the last bit is becoming crucial. It's a bit like the sort of self-reflection we've all had as societies post-COVID about the just-in-time society. I mean, I think every organization should probably have to plan for the loss of a key computer network. And are you at 0% for 10 weeks, or are you at 50% after 1 week? Because there's a huge difference in that. It's not really a cyber issue, it's a sort of business planning issue. So those are the sorts of things that organizations should be doing. And again, this is the point I keep coming back on to. I think, and I'm pleased the government's doing something about this with forthcoming legislation. Hitherto, all the incentives in terms of law, corporate governance, and so on are to say, protect personal data first and foremost. No, stop. Personal data is important, although in this case, it's in most of the M&S and Co-op stuff, it's little more than a glorified 21st century of the old-fashioned phone book. So prioritize your ability to keep your business running, particularly
right.
for service.
Yes, thank you very much. That's great. I'm going to move away from this very deep topic, and hopefully maybe in the future we can talk about the successful outcome of that, but this is ongoing. Uber has arrived in Oxford, but with limited options. It began operating in Oxford, despite being all over the rest of the world, and its surrounding areas on Wednesday, February the 26th, 25, defeating local taxi driver concerns, citing that it would negatively impact their business and a fear of an influx of out-of-town Uber drivers. Ciaran, I hope I'm not giving away personal identifiable information by stating that I think people have spotted you cycling around Oxford. I don't know if you rely at all upon taxis in this area.
I do. I travel, and so I rely on taxis in lots of different places, both here and abroad, and even in Oxford. Sometimes I live about 20 miles away from the city, so sometimes it's
that
late.
Could be a million miles.
We do depend upon taxis, and my view, quite frankly, is that the taxi service provision in Oxford for the last 25 years, to the best of my knowledge, has been totally crap.
Also, we can pivot here to the this is going to raise the temperature to the low traffic neighbourhood roadblocks in Oxford. So we live in a place, Ciaran, where
taxis don't come.
Yeah, 4 of the 5 routes out of our household to a main road have been blocked. So actually getting a taxi into that little zone is really challenging, and we've never managed it
We've had
before.
taxis that have fallen apart. We've had a taxi that caught fire in Jericho, completely huge fire, and we had to escape from it because it just had... We've had taxi companies who have refused to come and collect us. And so the landscape there was pretty desolate in our view. However, Uber, love them or hate them, are really solving a number of problems, wouldn't you agree, that are just simply operational problems that are just have not been defeated by local providers so far.
2 quick points on that. Firstly, there's a general point about life in Oxford where the city, as somebody living outside it but dependent on access to it, the city does sometimes feel like a fortress.
It is. And there's a mix of geography and policy there, isn't there, Ciaran?
Exactly, to keep invaders out. And Uber, for whatever its faults, appears to be capable at least of breaching the fortress in ways that other services are not. But so there is something to that. The second point is that, look, I mean, it's 2025. These types of services are ubiquitous all over the world. There are obviously issues around treatment of workers and the business model and so forth, but we have a parliament to decide on that sort of thing. I think competition, with providing competition to a fairly sclerotic local taxi network, is not something that we should lose any sleep over.
I think I must say, since they've arrived, we've managed to pay a bit extra to get a particular type of vehicle. The vehicle has arrived on time. We've been able to see where it's coming. We've got it into our low traffic neighborhood.
Lovely chats as well. So, Ciaran, we
I
need
do
to...
see people, by the way, in the United States campaigning for a no Tesla option in Uber. But
That's
leave
a
it.
huge topic.
Huge
Anyway,
topic.
before
That's
we
for
go on
another
to
time.
anything else, before we wrap up, it's time for our Tech Room 101. Room 101.
Ciaran Martin, what is your Tech Room 101?
What would you like to throw in the bin forever that's techie?
It's not really that techie. Will you permit me that? And it goes back to my
no.
guilty.
It's
we
just
just
anything
put
that irritates you.
absolutely anything.
It goes back to my guilty pleasure. It's the flip side of that. It's basically ubiquitous online feedback surveys. You can't do anything. You cannot do anything, but even if it's voluntary, you turn up, you give up your time freely, and then you say, "Oh, please fill in this form about your experience," and then you don't do it because you've given them hours of your time already, and then it's like, "Why haven't you filled in this form?" It keeps going and going, and that's when you do something for somebody. Then, if you're a provider, you get this nonsense about, "Oh, you were 4.5 today." What the hell does that mean?
I know.
So basically, we have this. There was a book out, and this is in the pre-digital age. It came out in 1997, I think. It was by a guy called Mike Power. It was called The Audit Society Rituals of Verification. It was about how we check everything and so forth. Now we're the Evaluation Society. You can't move without somebody filling in a form saying what they thought of it, telling you absolutely nothing. Get rid of all of those, ban them, punish the
I think we can agree with that. And also, it's so needy, isn't it? And you buy something online and then you get an evaluation request from a delivery driver or delivery company that you didn't really have any communication with at all, and it's just like on and on.
Thank you very much. You've ended with another passion
One of my
topic.
guilty outcomes, one of my guilty actions, if you let me know, is that every time I'm working on a presentation or so forth or something, and I'm collaborating with somebody, and there's a template, and there's always the feedback form in the end. If I've got the last call, I just at the last minute take it out.
Thank you very much, Ciaran Martin. I don't know if we have a comment of the week, team. Please interrupt me.
Oh
if
no,
we
there's
do.
Lucien as well. I knew it would happen. I don't know if you can see the screen, Ciaran, but there was Lucien as a rapper, very briefly. Yeah,
it terrifies me that they're able to generate AI, and sometimes they get Taylor Swift coming and sitting next to me and stuff. But,
can I talk about my duck?
Well, yeah, we have one last sentence each, please. But there's been a big breakthrough in Switzerland. They managed to catch a duck on a speed camera.
Yes, a repeat offender apparently. Bern in Switzerland, a duck was caught doing 52 kilometres per hour in a 30 kilometre an hour zone, and it may be a repeat offender. The authorities said it's definitely a real photo, and it is a really, really clear photo. If you're into images of ducks in flight, it's a beautiful one. But
Ciaran, and as a former public safety official, can you arrest animals?
I'm working in a building that had to be closed because a seagull kept dropping a pebble on the glass roof and picking it up and dropping it again. So I don't think you can, but I'm in favour of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ciaran Martin, for your time today. Really appreciate that. A very entertaining and interesting show today. Thank you very much, Ciaran.
Thank you.
thank you, Ciaran.
Thank you. I think